Hello, I think I've worked out a way that you can see this whole painting, because I never showed it to you. I only did it as a thumbnail, which didn't really do it any justice, and you might not even have noticed it. And that's a shame, because I like this painting very much. It is a portrait of Nick Drake, and it is called When the Light Has Flown. And because it's been painted portrait style rather than landscape style, unfortunately you get all this extraneous white and edging and so forth around it, which is the only way I can get back and show you the whole thing. We'll get closer in a minute, but I want you to see the whole thing, and hopefully on screen you'll be able to see that clearly, because there are things at the top that are important. It might be easier to cut off a bit of the bottom and keep the top in, because that's the most important part really, besides Nick sitting by the bush at the bottom. Haven't really got a lot to say about this painting except because it's pretty self-explanatory. The image was taken or based upon a photograph taken by the remarkable Keith Morris, who is no longer with us, and it's a very beautiful picture, and I extrapolated upon it and changed it into this to fit in with one of Nick's lyrics, which is When the Light Has Flown. I will leave any links below. I hope you can see this because my arms are getting a little bit hurty now trying to hold this up. I hope I'm not wobbling, but I think now you've seen the entirety of it, and that's a good thing. So let's go a bit closer. See, the thumbnail was this, which is all very well and good, but you may not have seen it very clearly, because I think they lose their definition once you get to a certain I don't think YouTube allows you to upload very good quality thumbnails, so when you get close to it, try and look at it in a larger sense. You will lose a lot of it. It'll start to pixelate, I think. So here he is, one of the nicest portraits I've ever done, and pretty accurate to how he looked. Obviously his hair did not look like that, but I am using my artistic license. Neither was the bush around hawthorn, I think, around him on fire at the time, but it was meant to show the light of his genius, basically. Was the prosaic meaning of that? I don't know. No, that would be more ordinary, wouldn't it? Yes, that was my interpretation of him sitting in this place where the light has flown. You can see that it's getting sort of dusky. The original photograph didn't look like this so much, especially not with this. Above his head you can see there are storm clouds gathering above his head, and there are some crows. There has to be some crows coming in. I'm going to get close because I'm very pleased with the way I detailed the branches lit up, and the crows, and the colours of the clouds. I worked so hard on this, and you probably never picked them up on your screen, but there are all sorts of greens and purples and incredible blends of colours in these clouds to try and get it to look really like there was a storm gathering above him, to tell the story really of where he was at. Because, well, I'd like you to find out about Nick for yourself, but he started off very optimistic in the blue skies. That's not focusing at all, is it? And gradually the storm clouds gathered in his life. Even though he was producing works of great genius, which is why I've kind of done this Blakean fiery halo of inspiration around his head. Not going to focus. Come on, you're trying, but you're not, are you? Anyway, that's the meaning of that. His head is not on fire. It's symbolic. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Prosaic was just not the right word at all, but I'm not going to go back and redo this. So scrap prosaic. It's symbolic. It's poetic, really. It's to express what was coming from within him as he sat brooding in the field, not really knowing that this was coming above him. Having an inkling, I think, because at this stage in his life he was starting to become more introverted and more disheartened, because his work, his genius work, was just not being recognised. It wasn't not being marketed well, it was not being promoted, partly through his own fault because he was too nervous and also too enigmatic, I think, too mysterious. In some ways, I think he stabbed himself in his own foot. Does that make sense? Did he stab himself in his own foot? I don't know. He didn't do himself any favours at all, really. He was extremely nervous. Not when he started off as a performer. All the people that knew him early on didn't think he was a nervous performer at all, but as soon as he got onto the stage and was pushed into venues that were totally unsuitable for him, where nobody was listening and people were talking, and there's a man playing very intricate, delicate music with a very wispy, hushed voice that requires intense concentration by the audience, and he's playing to people that are chatting and drinking and so forth, and it kind of broke him in a way. He just couldn't cope with it, and I understand that, absolutely. I understand why he couldn't cope with it. I'm in my own forays into being a performer. I couldn't cope with it either. But he had such talent and such presence, and it all started to get to him. He felt let down probably by himself as well, but also by the record company, who were putting him out in the most appalling sleeves with mistakes on the sleeves, and they weren't reaching people. And he did one interview in his life at a time when there was hardly any radio play. He didn't turn up for, I think, what was the prototype of the old grey whistle test. I think he was invited but it didn't come about. He did one interview where he barely spoke, and after that he didn't promote himself at all. And the record company, Ireland, which was part of Joe Boyd's Witch season, Joe Boyd, very famous person who was his mentor and who Nick trusted, seemed to be letting him down, pushing him into venues that were totally unsuitable and promoting his records. Have a look at Bryter Layter, his second album. The sleeve is atrocious. They rejected Keith Morris's photographs, and Keith Morris did the cover for 5 Leaves Left, and look at his photographs, they are so beautiful, and yet they put Nick on Bryter Layter. I'll just have a look at it. It's awful. It just says, I read a book recently about Nick, and it just says, the whole cover says loser, and it really does. It just, the cover's meant to be Bryter Layter. It's quite an up album. His only kind of up album. It's not my favourite because it's got a lot of jazzy production and all too much orchestration on it, and it's just too busy, overwhelms the beauty of his simple and eloquent songs. Anyway, I'm talking too much about Nick because I'm very enthusiastic. So yeah, at this point his first album hadn't reached many people, but his second album, Bryter Layter, reached even less people because he'd stopped gigging, he wasn't going to do any interviews, and it just kind of fell flat. And by the time he did his third album, he was not in a good way at all, and the storm clouds had really drawn in around him. But you can find all this out for yourself. There are 3 reasonably good documentaries about him on YouTube. One is an open letter to him, written by his sister Gabrielle Drake, the famous actress. So there are books, and there's all sorts of things that you could find as resources. There's a lot of information about Nick now, but at the time he was virtually unknown. He was gutted, actually. He was devastated, and he was also very prophetic, hence again this Blakean glow around his head, this bright light, this spiritual bright light around his head, that people just, people were aware of how special he was, but it just didn't happen for him. But Nick would talk to his dad and other people, especially his dad, Rodney, and he would say things like, you probably won't live to see me become famous, but one day they'll know, one day they'll recognise me. And it is so true. Unfortunately, both Nick's parents and Nick himself had long since passed away, but now he's a bit of a cult, and his home, Farlees in Tanworth in Arden in Warwickshire, has become a bit of a Gracelands of Nick Drake cultdom. So yeah, none of them lived, except for Gabrielle, his sister, none of them lived to see this, but Nick knew, and he wrote the song Fruit Tree, which I will put a link below to. on his first album, because he already knew when he started off that he wasn't going to get the recognition while in his own lifetime, but his time would come and he wouldn't see it. Perhaps he has seen it, but not from the physical level. So at this stage, when I did this painting, he's not been destroyed by all this failure and disappointment. He said to his mum Molly that he'd failed at everything he'd tried to do, which was just so untrue, but he must have felt that way. It must have broken his heart. He was an incredibly sensitive person. Nobody really knew him. He was very deep and took it all inside himself. But at this stage, I think he still had some optimism, but also knowing that these clouds were coming, the crows were coming in, the rain was starting, and there's a not too subtle reference to Five Leaves there. Five Leaves Left, his first album, but the leaves are turning into silver birds and flying away, as will Nick in a very short time. I think within 5 years of him starting off, he was gone. So I'll leave you to discover more about him. I just wanted to share this painting with you because I hadn't. I think I've gabbled rather breathlessly there about him, because he is somebody I feel very strongly about, like so many other people do, because his music is it's ethereal, it's from somewhere else. And unfortunately, Bryter Layter, all of that gets smothered with fussy arrangements that didn't need to be there, and they kind of date the music somewhat too. So I would recommend to you either the introduction to Nick Drake, which is called Way to Blue, which has got some of the more beautiful songs on it, or Five Leaves Left, the first album, or Pink Moon, if you can bear Nick's pain on that. And there's also Time of No Reply, which was posthumously released and has some very beautiful songs on it, like Clothes of Sand and Joey, which are lesser known. And also I Was Made to Love Magic, which is kind of where I got the inspiration for this from as well. So there it is. I think I've done okay. 12 minutes of your time taken up with another of my things, and there will be more. Okay, lots of love. Thanks for watching this. I hope it gave you a better insight into this painting, because I hate doing these things and then they just never get seen or heard. You know, obviously I do them for the love of it. I do them because I have to and I want to, but the whole point of art and music is to share. So here's a share. Lots of love. Please find out about Nick. Even if you don't like the sort of music he does, hopefully you can appreciate the skill, the incredible skill of his guitar playing and singing and songcraft. There he is, and there he was gone. Okay, bye bye.